Hello, welcome back to another 3D printing and painting video. In this video, I want to talk about how to actually paint skin, and I'm going to be demonstrating that as well. My previous video, I went into some airbrushing tips and tricks. I think that would be worth a watch if you haven't watched it already. This is how I paint skin. There are probably many ways of painting skin, but I like my way because it's simple. I think anyone can do it really. First, I apply the primer. I apply a base coat following that, and then the main skin color. I pick a color that's a bit darker than the main skin color to act as the shading. And then afterwards, plus or minus, you can add highlights with a color lighter than the main skin color. I find that if you're doing very small miniatures, like Games Workshop sized, you would want to do highlighting to accentuate the shape of the model. But when you're doing really large figures, like 40 centimeters to 60 centimeters tall, real world lighting tends to take care of the highlights, I find. And I think that when I add highlights, at least to those models that are that big, it looks a bit artificial. Without further ado, let's go to the videos. So the next part of the video is just me sort of commentating on what I'm doing, which is painting the skin. So I use gray primer, and I fill my airbrush with gray primer, but it's at this point that I notice that the flow isn't as strong or as good as I'm used to it being, and I realize that my airbrush is actually a bit clogged, probably because I didn't clean the airbrush properly the day before. I get lazy like that sometimes, and so I spend what seems like eternity trying to unclog the airbrush, plunging at it, pulling the needle in and out. And looks like I've got it working though, and I'm sort of spraying it. This bust, this practice model is actually it's from ESM's Velma, which I've cut in a 3D editing software. I cut the arms and legs off just so I could have the torso to practice painting on. I printed it with Soraya Tech's navy gray resin. I've been a long-term user of eSun's standard gray and black, and someone on the forums very kindly advised that Soraya Tech was superior and that I'd get less mistakes when printing with it. And I haven't used Soraya. This is the first model I've printed with Soraya Tech's resin, but I'm feeling optimistic. I think Soraya Tech is probably better than the one I was using before. Certainly I'm seeing less layer lines, it's smoother, and there you go. And I'm still trying to fix the airbrush. The flow's not as good as I had hoped it was. Later on I actually clean it properly before I move on to the next part, and I apply some lubricant as well for what it's worth. Are you quite done yet? Are you quite done yet? There you go. All right. It's a rough job. Usually for primer, you need at least 24 hours for it to fully dry before you handle it and layer other paint on it. I did this whole exercise in, I'd say, less than 30 minutes. So I wasn't really going for quality here. I just wanted to throw something together to give you guys an idea of how I go about doing skin. Next, that was a bit quick, but did you see I'm using Elvic Flesh and as my base coat, and I'm putting some into the paint pot there. I almost knocked my phone off there, I almost broke it, but so water, I'm watering it down. Very good, very good. Okay, bubble. All right, there, it flows good. Now I'm just coating the entire model with Elvic Flesh. I've often asked myself, because I like to take shortcuts and I don't like to do things that I feel are unnecessary. I've asked myself, why am I bothering to do a base coat? I mean, if I'm going to do the main skin color, should I just do that from straight up? And I've tried that before, and for some reason, when you have a layering of paints, it sort of gives it a bit more dimension. It's hard to explain. If you feel like you can get away with it, then don't bother base coating, but I've gotten good results from it, so I'm going to keep doing it. And it's not too eventful, is it? make sure not to spray too much paint on at once. If you can, always do lighter, thinner layers. Many thin layers. Many thin layers. He's still going at it. Next, that's the main skin color, pale flesh. Oh my gosh. Once again, watering it down to get it to a milky consistency. A bit more water. Alright. Bubble, bubble. Uh-oh. Alright. Now, this model has been coated with Elvic flesh. Now I coat it with pale flesh. All of these paints are from Vallejo's Game Color range. And I spray on indiscriminately. I'm not trying to shade or cast any shadow or highlight here. I'm just here to achieve 100% coverage if possible. And yep. Next part, rosy flesh. I use rosy flesh for shading, and this part is sped up, but not sped up to the same degree as before, because I guess previously you just sort of paint the whole model with the paint, but now you have to be a bit more careful, and so I want to show you where I put those shadows. And you notice what I'm doing here, I'm adjusting the MAC valve, which I went over in my previous video, to adjust the air pressure coming out. Because I'm going to have my airbrush very close to the model, I can't have the air leaving at a high velocity. I have to decrease the air pressure and decrease the amount of paint that is flying out of the airbrush because I'm so close to the model. So where do you put the shadows? So shading under the boobs here, armpit area, axilla, which is the side of the chest down the shoulder. Then I'm trying to carve out the abs, and while I'm doing it, it's actually quite a rough job. I understand the video is sped up, but even in real life, in real time, I'm not taking too much care. I'm just sort of putting the colors there, because I know that afterwards I'm going to clean them up anyway, and I'll show you when that time comes. So here, sort of under the belly, between the legs and the hip, and sort of the bum, the folds of the skin, and then the back. You see how the model already comes with lines and shapes and grooves? I use that to guide me on where I put the shading. If the model had a really flat back, I wouldn't know what to do. So I see those lines and I put the pink there, the rosy flesh. I put the rosy flesh there, and I'm doing quite a messy job, you know. I'm just sort of, I mean, look at that. These are very coarse, very broad strokes of the airbrush. And yeah, like that. And of course you must remember everything is on low at the moment. Low air pressure, low paint flow. Between the arms, in the, how do you call it, just underneath the neck area there. And I'm always sort of testing it on my hands rather, to make sure that when I make an adjustment in the setting, it's not going to screw up my model. I double check what it's going to look like on my own skin first. And then just going over previous spots. Again, I don't mind over shading, because we're going to fix this all in the end. And we've come to the end. Pale flesh. That's the main skin color, and that I'm going to use to go over where I've overshaded things to fix up the shading area and to really put the finishing touches to it. Again, double checking what it looks like on my own hand before I spray it onto the model. The boob area, making sure that the boob, that's not the underboob, is well lit. Cleaning up where I so callously sprayed on the shading before. And then just trying to add some light to the rib cage. The top of the, how do you call the waist there, I make sure is white, or lighter color anyway. And you notice here that I think I touched the model while my hand was still wet, and the model actually got wet a bit, so I try to dry it with the airbrush by just using the air function and not introducing the paint. I spray the bottom, make sure the shading doesn't sort of get over the bottom. In the back, which I was quite careless with before, I'm also trying to fix up a bit, making sure that the rosy flesh is only in the dimples, and that where the flesh is raised, where the parts of the back where it's raised, is the color of pale flesh. I'm also a fan of generally lightening up the shading by just using this low volume, low air pressure airbrush setting and just spraying over it quite generally. Hello? Alright, we're back. Okay, so I'm trying to highlight the clavicles here. Yeah, and brightening up the groin area as well, because the shading should only be in those folds of flesh. This is a very low airbrush setting. I'll say again, if your airbrush doesn't have the option to go at such a low level, it's going to be very hard for you. And that's it. We're at the end of the video. Here's the finished product. You can see the one that we just did is closest to the camera. I've got 3 busts in the background. That's a preview actually. I've been printing off a lot of busts and trying different colors, trying to get different skin tones. And when I've got more findings, I've got more busts painted up, I'm very happy to share that with y'all. So that's something to look forward to. But in the meantime, the one in front, the one that we just did, it's still quite a fresh paint job. As you give it time, it's going to mature a bit and darken a bit as well. And I prefer it when it's more dry. I think the colors actually look better. So if I had to take a picture maybe 24 hours from now, in my opinion, the paint job would actually look even better. The colors will look as if they're blended together even more. And so that's that. As you can see, it's not a very difficult process at all to get this sort of skin effect. Please have a go, see what you think. If you find a new way to do things, a better way to do things, improvements to my technique, any advice from me, please leave a comment. I appreciate any feedback, any input. I'm a sucker for learning, as they say.